comes to this legislation. I've had people come who are on the conservative riding associations, liberals, greens, nonpartisan people. It makes no difference. This is a cross-partisan issue, absolutely. And we've seen that provincially, where several liberal MLAs have come out in favor of changing the cannabis laws quite strongly. And there's many conservatives who are libertarian types who also support changing the cannabis laws and want to see this change. So it crosses the spectrum, and especially here in British Columbia. And so, to get this law through, we should certainly be pressuring our political leaders, and it seems likely the NDP is going to take power in March or May, although there's no guarantee of that, but we should be pushing both of them to bring this law forward and to make it happen in British Columbia. But, you know, I think we're going to have a referendum on this to get it through. And so, to have a referendum in British Columbia, no one really knows how this system works because it rarely gets used, but to have a referendum, you need to get 10% of the registered voters in every one of British Columbia's 85 ridings to sign on board. And they have to do it within a 90-day period. You only have 3 months to gather all those signatures. If you get 9.99% in just one electoral district, then you fail. So it's a very, very high threshold to get across. And yet, I believe it can be done. And we're trying a strategy that has never been tried before. Many have tried to get things on the ballot. They've all failed miserably except for the anti-HST campaign. And we actually have more public support when it comes to polling for getting rid of the cannabis laws than we did in British Columbia for getting rid of the HST. There is very broad support for our issue. What we lack is infrastructure. We lack volunteers. We lack people on the ground, although we're building that, and that's why I'm on tour. We've got to get more volunteers out there. We've got to spread the word so we have activists working in every town and every city and every community across this province to make it happen. So we need to get 10% of those signatures in a 90-day period. So what we did is we filed this bill with Elections BC, and they approved it and said, yes, you can have a referendum on this. And even that is very important because having Elections BC certify it means that this is a law that we can pass as a province. Elections BC won't let you have a referendum if your law is unconstitutional or outside of BC's jurisdiction. And in fact, we tried a few different ideas with different types of legislation so that we could legalize cultivation of a small number of plants or something like that in British Columbia, but they said, no, you can't do that because you can't create regulations and rules around illegal activity. You can only direct police resources in that sense. So we thought, well, possession is the one area that everyone agrees, or for the most part, that those in possession of cannabis are not criminals and should not be a police priority. But we're going to need some rules in place before we can change the laws on trafficking and on cultivation and that kind of stuff, right? So Elections BC actually rejected a few of our original ones, but they accepted this version of the legislation. And that means that when our political leaders say, oh, well, this is a federal issue and I can't do a thing, my hands are tied, we can say, no, you're wrong, there is something you can do. You can pass a Sensible Policing Act, and that's been proven legally to be a valid piece of legislation for our province. And I'll just add, we can also point out to our political leaders that this is not without precedent. You know, just 8 years ago, in 2000, I guess 9 years ago, in 2003, we had 8 provinces all decriminalize possession of an unregistered long gun in violation of federal law. The Long Gun Registry, part of the Firearms Act, it specified that long guns must be registered, and yet 8 attorney generals said, we're not going to enforce this federal law. If there's an otherwise law-abiding citizen who happens to be in possession of an unregistered long gun, we are telling our police and prosecutors to not make that a priority, to leave that person alone. They can do that for an unregistered long gun. They can do the exact same thing for possession of cannabis. And we also have the precedent of Insight, the supervised injection site in Vancouver, where the federal government wanted to shut it down, saying it was their jurisdiction. And the province of British Columbia went to court against the federal government, and we won. We won in both cases. The long gun registry is essentially gone, and Insight's still here. So the provinces do have a role to play in these questions, and they do have the power to stand up and influence the federal government and to win when they have those battles. So to get this passed, we need to get 10% of the registered voters in every riding to sign on board. They got to do it in 3 months. So Elections BC said, yes, you can have a referendum, and they actually started that clock for us already, but I told them, no, we're going to withdraw it. We just wanted to get your approval. We're going to resubmit this legislation next year so that 90-day clock will start in September of 2013. And so we're going to spend the time between now and then pre-registering our supporters, getting our volunteers out there, getting our database full of people, so that when we come to September 2013, we've got volunteers all across the province, and we've got hopefully the 400,000 people that we need pre-registered in advance, so that we can just send our volunteers, here's the 500 people in your neighborhood that said they were going to sign up, go and get their signatures. We don't have to seek out random people at that point. And if we do that, if we can get everybody in place, we have a pretty good chance, I think, of getting this through. Now, if we succeed in getting all those signatures, then the referendum would be held in September 2014. It's a fixed election date. It's supposed to be every 3 years in September. We're supposed to be voting on all the different things that the citizens of British Columbia brought forward as ballot initiatives. Because that never happens, we hardly ever have referendums. And so, like I said, people aren't familiar with the process. But the next referendum is scheduled for September 2014. Now, of course, the Premier can call a referendum for any time, or could just pass this legislation on their own. But if we're going to follow the ballot initiative and referendum legislation, then we have 2 years from now, essentially, until the vote happens. So that's another reason why we can take the time over the next 10 months to build our support and get the people out there that we need, so that we can have a big head start when we come into September 2013 to get the signatures that we have to get. And so I feel this is a very historic opportunity for us, and that we could really make this change happen in British Columbia. But I also worry that people are taking it for granted that it's just going to happen and it's going to be easy and it's inevitable. That inevitability argument really bothers me, and I'll tell you why. Because if we look back to when I was a little kid in the 1970s, people thought marijuana was just about to be decriminalized or legalized any day. And in Canada, we had Joe Clark, the Conservative Prime Minister, and Pierre Trudeau, Liberal Prime Minister, both saying, it's time to change the cannabis laws. It's time to decriminalize or legalize or do something differently. In the US, many American states were having referendums and decriminalizing cannabis possession by taking it out as a criminal thing and making it a ticket or a fine and that kind of thing. And even Jimmy Carter, US President, was saying it's time to change the cannabis laws. There was a broad consensus, like there is now. American states are voting to change the law, like they are now. And yet a whole generation went by. And for the most part, these laws have only gotten worse. And there's no reason why that can't happen again. There's no reason why we can't see this drag on for longer and longer. And indeed, the same time those two wonderful votes happened in the US, or those 3 votes happened, Massachusetts allowing medical cannabis, Washington and Colorado legalizing, the same day, our federal government put into force their mandatory minimum laws that give you a 6-month jail sentence for growing 6 or more cannabis plants. And they get a lot longer if you're growing more plants than that. I fall under those mandatory minimums. I qualify for a 2-year sentence because I run a medical marijuana dispensary, which among our 4,000 members, we have some minors who use cannabis for medical use with the parental permission, with their doctor's permission, but they may not be part of the Health Canada program. Well, that, under these new laws, is a 2-year minimum sentence for trafficking in cannabis to a minor, even when I'm in that sense. So there's certainly a lot of people could fall under these laws, and things could get worse in Canada in many ways. But at the same time, I've been doing this for a long time, and people have always thought it's about to happen, and I've always said, no, we're lucky if it happens in our lifetime. But I do finally feel that I can see a path from where we are now to where we want to be. And I can see that there is that opportunity to actually change these laws and to get this legislation through and to make it happen. And if we work hard, if we work together, I believe we can make that happen in British Columbia. We can decriminalize possession at the end of 2014 with this vote. And what a year later after that, we should have it in place to legalize cannabis. At the end of 2015, there will be a federal election. If Stephen Harper maintains his majority, then I don't think we're going to be able to change the federal laws in Canada unless we beat them in the courts. But we could still decriminalize possession in British Columbia. The federal government can't stop us on that one. But if Harper is defeated in 2015, and that will just be about a year after this referendum happens, this will be an important discussion in the next federal election. Whether it's the Liberals or the NDP or who knows what happens, but every party, aside from the Conservatives, has a much more progressive cannabis policy. And it'd be easiest for our Prime Minister just to let British Columbia go its own way and not to impose legalization on other provinces. They will come along. I'm very confident they will come along once we show what a success it is here in British Columbia. And within a few years, I believe legalization will spread across the rest of the country once British Columbia starts this experiment and makes it happen. And you know, I've got a daughter who's 14 years old. She's going to be 15 in a couple of weeks. And when I look back on how the history of these laws and how long it's taken and how everyone thought it was going to change in the late 70s and how a whole generation's gone by, I just hope that when she has children, that they don't have to know cannabis prohibition in this part of their life. And all of us here, all of us, no matter how old we are, all of us have never lived when cannabis was legal. These laws have been in place for so long that we've all been grown up in them, and sometimes it feels sort of normal and natural that it's like this, but actuality, it's not normal and natural at all. It's highly unnormal. It's a very bizarre and abnormal state of affairs that one of the world's most useful plants, many of the world's most useful plants, are banned and forbidden forbidden by criminal law and you can't even grow them in your own garden. And that the penalties for that are more severe than many violent crimes and many more severe things. And so I like to imagine the future, and I want you to imagine this with me. I want you to imagine your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, however old you are, and I want you to think of them reading their history book one day while you're getting ready to send them off to school, and they're studying, getting ready for their classes, and they turn to you and they say, Grandma, Grandpa, I'm reading in my history book that cannabis hemp used to be illegal and people used to go to jail for growing this plant, but I know our house is made mostly out of hemp, and I know the school bus that drives me to school runs on hemp fuel, and my history book's printed on hemp paper, and I know I just had hemp cereal for breakfast, and I know that you use cannabis to ease the aches and pains of being a senior citizen, so how is it that this used to be against the law? And I want you to be able to say, well, you know what? It's true that the plant used to be illegal, and that I helped to change those laws. I got involved, and I made a difference, and when the Sensible BC tour came to my town, I decided I was going to get involved, and I was out there signing up signatures. I worked my ass off to make that referendum happen, and when I cast that ballot to legalize cannabis in British Columbia, that was the best vote I ever cast. And so that you will never have to know what it is to be harassed or arrested or imprisoned for what herbal medicine you choose to use or for what plant you choose to grow in your garden. Let's end this battle. Let's end the war on cannabis. Let's do it now in the next 5 years while we have this chance. Let's not pass it off to another generation. Let's not have that conversation be, oh, I'm sorry you got busted for that cannabis and now there's a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence for possession because we weren't able to change these laws. Maybe you'll get around to it. Let's not have that the way we're looking back at this 20 or 30 years from now. Let's be able to celebrate that we got involved, that we made a difference, so that future generations do not have to know and do not have to live through the real nightmare that is cannabis prohibition in Canada. Thank you very much for coming and being here. I hope you'll sign up and register with our organization so we can stay in touch with you. Promise not to spam you. If you don't want to get our emails, you don't have to. But at a minimum, I hope you'll sign up and register so that we can easily get in touch with you next September when we want to get your signature, at a minimum. But even more than that, I'm hoping you'll take an extra stack of sign-up forms or take one of the manila envelopes where we've got some inspirational material, some information about how to be a good activist, how to sign up people and get involved. And so that you can get those signatures, give them to Mick, get your friends and neighbors and families and coworkers to register on our piece of paper. They can also do it online, but it's much better to stick a paper in someone's face with a pen and say, do you want to change the cannabis laws? If so, sign here. We can make a difference. If you can do those things, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, but really, I want you to get out into your communities. I want to talk to your friends and family about what you heard here tonight. I want you to share the word for the Sensible BC campaign so that we've got a solid contingent of people here that are volunteering, that are working for this campaign, and you can join other activists all around the province who are working hard. This is like stop, I think, 29 on my tour. I've talked to crowds of 500 people. I've talked to crowds of 3 or 4 people. But everywhere I go, people are excited and inspired. They want to get out there. They want to be a part of this. They want to make a difference. Let's make this happen in our province. Let's not let this special opportunity that we have right now, when timing is so perfect, when everything's fallen into place, let's take advantage. Let's strike while the iron is hot. Let's change these laws in British Columbia. We can do it together. Thank you very much for being here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you. If anybody has any questions or anything, I can just point to you and let you ask, or else I can just ramble on for a while about other things. Somebody's got a question. There you go.
How do we know that if they legalize marijuana here in Canada, that it won't go under the same restrictions as tobacco? Like, that it won't be completely controlled by the government and the chemicals will be added in?
That's a very good question, and one that we hear a lot. And I hear people who sometimes say, well, we shouldn't decriminalize, we should legalize, or we shouldn't legalize, we should just decriminalize, or they have different perceptions of what those words mean, and there's certainly a fear that it'll get industrialized and kind of ruined the way tobacco maybe has been ruined, right, in that industrial way. And our legislation doesn't specify how we're going to change the laws of British Columbia, so that model could be put into place, but I will be not advocating for that, certainly, and I think that any legal cannabis model has to compete with what's there now. We've already got a robust cannabis industry in British Columbia that's not going anywhere. So if the legal cannabis has got to be equal or same quality and equal or lower price to compete with what's there now, or no one's going to buy it, no one's going to use it. If there's government cannabis that's lower quality and higher cost, people are going to go to the guy down the street or go to the dispensary or go to the person they were getting it from in the first place. But I will say that that's a common fear, and the model that I like to see for cannabis and that I'll be advocating for and working towards, I would like the wine kind of a model for cannabis in terms of how we regulate it and control it. If you want to make wine in your own home,
you can do so. There's no real big taxes or restrictions on that. There's a limit on how much you can make. You can't sell it, but you can give it to your friends. You can share it without commercial transfer. It's not very tightly regulated, and the regulations are mostly for safety and to make sure you're not sneaking in a commercial operation. Anyone can open a winery. There isn't a limited number of wineries. There isn't a special restricted winery license. As long as you follow the rules and are safe about it, anyone can open a winery. Anyone can compete on that market. But the provincial government is the primary buyer and seller of wine. They run most of the liquor stores. There's other avenues to get it as well, but that's the primary way to get it. And the tax you'll pay on your wine varies quite a bit. In your own home, you don't really pay any tax on it at all. You can go to a U-brew place and make wine there. It's not that taxed heavily as well. At a liquor store, there's more tax. In a fine restaurant, you pay a higher amount, so the amount can change quite a bit. That same bottle of wine can cost quite a few different amounts depending on where you consume it and how you get it. And I'd like to see a similar kind of model for cannabis. And I think with tobacco, most tobacco users have one brand of tobacco, one kind that they like to use, and that's usually it. You don't find them usually trying different varieties or that kind of thing, right? With cannabis, I feel it's more like wine also. There isn't one best kind of cannabis. There isn't one best kind of wine. People who drink wine or smoke cannabis like to have different varieties and different options available to them. There's all kinds of flavors and strains with a wine. In fact, with cannabis, it's even more because even different kinds of wine, usually the effect is pretty much the same in terms of how the alcohol affects your body. But with cannabis, different varieties can have quite different effects as the chemicals and the THC and CBD and CBN and flavonoids and terpenoids and all these different things interact in different ways. So cannabis can vary quite a bit in terms of its effects. And so a lot of users like that. So I think that it lends itself more to a niche market where people could produce smaller amounts of connoisseur cannabis and be able to put that in the market. But I certainly do not want to see the only legal cannabis out there being produced by Monsanto and DuPont and Du Maurier or something like that. That would be a bad situation. But I think that if that was where it went, I think that it wouldn't succeed because the people are not going to be interested in low quality, expensive products or things that are manipulated with other chemicals and that. Most cannabis users that I know want their cannabis to be organic. They want it to be clean. They want to know how it's grown. And I'm pretty sure if we had a legal system where there's the Du Maurier cannabis and the organically grown certified cannabis, that second one is going to sell a lot better than the other one does. And that's what I'd like to see. So that's, although I said our thing doesn't specify that, we have to have that conversation, but that's where I'd like to go, and I think that's where we'd be pushing this to go in British Columbia. Yes. Sure. Well, what I would say is that for most of the studies I've seen, research shows that cannabis is, even if it's harmful, it's less harmful than alcohol, less harmful than tobacco. For some people, it's highly beneficial and therapeutic. But I would say rather than getting into a conversation about what the potential harms of cannabis are, let's discuss how to reduce whatever those harms might be. If smoking is indeed harmful, and I would question whether smoking of cannabis is really as harmful as tobacco, but let's say it is. How do we best reduce those harms? We do it in a legally regulated system. We encourage people maybe not to smoke. Maybe vaporizing should be promoted more. Maybe eating it should be promoted more. At our dispensary, we sell a lot of smokable products, but we sell a lot of other forms of cannabis too. We sell capsules, we sell tinctures, we sell food products, topical creams and ointments, which are actually quite incredible, have very low, no psychoactivity. Maybe if you ate a jar of the cream or something, but it's essentially a topical ointment. It works incredibly well for arthritis, for psoriasis, for eczema, for localized pain, surgical relief, post-surgical pain, I should say, cuts and scrapes and bruises. It's an incredible, incredible medicine, no psychoactivity, rich in cannabinoids. That kind of product I could see being sold in London drugs or mainstream outlets. So I would say that whatever the harms of cannabis might be, the way to reduce them is in a legally regulated system. If you want to see less people using cannabis, studies show that typically societies that have a legally regulated system usually have lower cannabis use than those that have harsh prohibition. In Holland, and they don't really have a tightly regulated system in Holland, it's kind of half-hearted there, but the system they have in Holland, less minors use cannabis. Overall, less people use cannabis, less people smoke it. So I would say that even if you're against cannabis, even if you think cannabis is a carcinogenic, harmful substance that people should not use, The best way to reduce those harms and to maximize any benefits is in a legally regulated system. You know, aside from red wine manufacturers, there aren't many people who will claim that alcohol is really good for you. But alcohol prohibition made all those harms worse. During alcohol prohibition, people went blind regularly from drinking homemade alcohol. Stills exploded, it put homes at risk, it caused a lot of problems. And although we still have problems with alcohol, and we're probably always going to have problems with alcohol, they're a lot reduced in a legally regulated system. We have control over it. We can control the potency. We can control the age limits. We can tax it. We can set hours of limits about when you can sell it and when you can't sell it. We can zone it so it can only be available in certain areas. We have all this control over it. With cannabis, we have no control because we've advocated it to the prohibitionist system. So I would believe, and I think studies show, that rules and regulations and safety requirements, you know, if I'm going to buy legal cannabis, I want it to be, if it's organic, I want it labeled organic. I want to know that's true. I don't want to see pesticides and herbicides and weird stuff sprayed on my plants. If I'm buying an extract, I want to know what is the percentage of cannabinoids, how it was made. So I think under that kind of system, we could make it safer. Any other questions? Mick?
Just add to your point what you were saying there, and I'd like to tell a lot of people is that right now, who's in control of cannabis is kids at high school, because that's where it is. That's, you know, the underage people are going, and they know that BC needed high school, it's or a school place, and that's where they do their business, where the cannabis is sold. Trades back and forth, people, they pool money, you know, or make their arrangements. And when if we take control, it comes back to the adults, and we are the ones who decide when and where who gets it. So, good point.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I ask a pertinent question?
Yes, of course.
Why do you use cannabis?
I've used cannabis for pretty much all of my adult life. I started smoking pot when I was around 18. I enjoyed it at the time. It gave me inspiration, and it gave me good ideas. It made me feel better. It made me sleep better. As an adult, I use it for creative purposes. I also use it to relieve pain, and I use it to help me sleep better. So the reasons that I've used it have sort of changed over the years in some way. And at our dispensary, people come in sometimes who've used cannabis for many years and find it has a medical benefit. Now, as an adult or as a senior, they change the reason they're using it, and others have never used it at all and find it benefits them. But yeah, that's why I use cannabis, is because I enjoy it. Yeah, go ahead. I use cannabis most days, so yeah, I've used, not right beforehand. I don't like to get too big right before I give a talk, but yeah, I use cannabis pretty regularly.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it doesn't really interfere with my day-to-day life. And most of the cannabis users that I know are highly motivated, highly busy people who accomplish a lot. Certainly, if you want to lie around on the couch all day, cannabis can accentuate that as well. But it's not. I don't think it's necessarily part of that, right? Yeah, I think, you know, it depends on the person, and different things affect different people in different ways. But if used properly, I think cannabis can be an aid to creativity and can be a motivator. But like other things too, using a lot of it or using it at the wrong time or using the wrong strains as well can be difficult sometimes. Some strains are more energizing and focusing, and some are more relaxing and sedating. And so knowing what you're using and how to use it really helps. And in a prohibitionist system, people don't usually know what strain they're getting. Research is stifled. They don't really have a lot of options of how to use it. And so I think, you know, in a legal system, we could maximize those benefits. But yeah, thanks for your question. You have another question? Yeah?
And don't get me wrong, something I'm against what you're trying to do. In fact, a lot of the things that you mentioned when you were speaking, I agree with.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just looking at the other, trying to look at the other side of the picture. I remember in my days when smoking was allowed in, this would never happen, would be allowed in, for example, restaurants. And you'd address the problem when you'd say to someone, excuse me, would you mind just blowing this whole thing, this guy weed? And they were pretty blunt about their right to smoke where they wanted to, when they wanted to. So one of my concerns, and I don't have too many,
Mm-hmm.
For example, in a park, and someone is out smoking cannabis and a dog beneath them. The neighbors in turn have that same odor and the same smell. What rights do those people have over the rights of someone who says it's now legal to enjoy this in their home? It's a legitimate question. It doesn't mean to say.
Oh, absolutely, no. And there's always going to be tension with those things, with different people's rights overlapping, right?
Address that, looking back to my example of some of the abuse that non-smokers used to get when smoking was allowed in.
My simple answer would be I would imagine it'd be the exact same as tobacco. That if you have a zone where you can't smoke tobacco, you can't use cannabis there either. I think it would be as simple as that. I would expect municipalities that have anti-smoking bylaws, and most of that's done at the municipal level. And some municipalities right now phrase their bylaws in such a way that they encompass all smoking of everything. Other ones only have bylaws that encompass tobacco, but they could just add a few words and make it so that you can't smoke the same, like with smoking of tobacco and cannabis. I think cannabis smoke is a lot less harmful than tobacco smoke is. But regardless of that, some people don't like it and shouldn't be exposed to things. I would think that would be the way to deal with it. But I also think that vaporizing and non-smokable forms of cannabis would be more accessible under a legal system. And that, although certainly some people are always going to choose to smoke joints, and that's, or do bong hits or whatever, and that's a legitimate way of using it. I think in a legal system, more options would be available. For the average person now who wants to buy cannabis or use it, smokable cannabis is all they can really get. You don't, it may be cookies, but even food products are often hard to titrate your dose, and one cookie that's quite potent can look the same as another one that's got nothing, so it's hard to know what you're getting and what you're using, but a bud is a bud, and you can usually look at it and tell. So I think in a legal system there'll be less smoking and more vaporizing, more tinctures. For most of European history, cannabis was consumed in a tincture, and we have products you spray under your tongue, and they're quite fast acting and effective, and so yeah, but ultimately I would say that those kind of questions do arise, but I would expect that city bylaws and regulations would be such that smoking of cannabis and tobacco would be dealt with in the same way and would be limited to the same kind of areas. Anybody else want to know anything or got any questions? That's okay if you don't. That's all right. That's all right. But, well, I'll just, I'm not even sure what time it is or how long we've still got on our thing or whatever, but I will say that I hope that you will get out there and get involved and take this message to your friends and families and get people signed up and help make this a difference. We're getting stacks of forms coming in, all kinds of people, especially in the interior where I've traveled already, are registering people, sending in their forms, getting people set up for our system. We've got over 10,000 people in our database, more are coming in all the time, but we're going to need about 400,000 people, 400,000 signatures to really get this over the top. It's about roughly 3,000 to 5,000 people per electoral district, depending. The rural ones, usually it's a smaller number. Some of the denser urban ones, it's a bit bigger. But it's around 3,000 to 5,000 people we need to register in each electoral district. And they got to be registered voters as well. So it's a big challenge. Did you want to say something, or I saw you?
I was just wondering if the referendum was successful and it was, cannabis was decriminalized in British Columbia. I'm just wondering about decriminalization. Does that mean that it would not fall under the criminal code of Canada, but you might still be?
No, the law would, it wouldn't even be that. No, it's not a parking ticket. There's no, we're not changing the federal law. What we're doing is we're telling our police to spend no time and resources on searching or seizing or detaining or arresting anybody for possession. So essentially we're telling the police to stop enforcing the law against simple cannabis possession, to make that their absolute lowest priority so that no resources are spent on it. There's no ticket, there's no alternative penalty. If you're a minor, then you could get a ticket for the same as you do for alcohol, but it wouldn't be, there's no handcuffing or arresting or charging, but a minor can get a ticket in the same way as alcohol. But for adults, we're simply telling the police to leave people alone. So we can't change the actual law, we can tell the police what to do, and we can set priorities for the police, and in the same way we told police to stop bothering otherwise law-abiding citizens who possess an unregistered long gun in violation of federal law. We're telling the police to not bother otherwise law-abiding citizens who possess some cannabis in violation. Absolutely, and the hemp industry in Canada is really very small and very nascent. Most of the hemp being grown in Canada is being grown for seed, because the seed is the highest markup and also the easiest to harvest and process. To make the other products, to do hempcrete, or even to do fiber and clothing and textiles, takes more infrastructure and more technology to make that work, and we haven't seen that investment happening, although Manitoba is doing a bit towards that. And to use hemp for fuel also requires even more infrastructure to take advantage of it that way as well. And I wish our federal government or even provincial governments were investing more in that, and perhaps investing a little less in the tar sands and those kind of things, subsidizing the petroleum industry. And you mentioned hempcrete as a building material. It's lighter and stronger than concrete. It also, when you're building it, you're absorbing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, putting it into your plants, and then you're turning those plants into concrete. So you can have buildings that are carbon negative, and that the production of this building actually takes carbon out of the atmosphere and locks it into your building, which is amazing. And you know, I could talk all night about the different benefits of industrial hemp, but one that's actually often overlooked is the medicinal benefits of industrial hemp. And actually, industrial hemp, especially when grown for seed, I think is actually more medicinal than what we call marijuana, oddly enough. And that's kind of a strange thing, but what we call marijuana is essentially cannabis that's bred to be high in THC, and as a result is usually lower in other cannabinoids. And there's a whole bunch of other cannabinoids. There's CBD and CBN and CBG and other things. They're all sort of variants on these molecules. THC is the most well-known and one of the most psychoactive. What we call hemp in Canada is cannabis that is grown to be low in THC. It's got to be under 0.3% THC in the plant for it to qualify as hemp. So they grow special strains that are bred to be low in that. Now, when you grow hemp for fiber, you grow hermaphrodite plants and you grow them really tall, so they're all the same height, the same thing, and you harvest them before they go to flower. So you don't get a lot of resins or flowers or anything on the plants. But when you grow cannabis for seed, you grow short, squat plants with big buds. They look like marijuana, and you keep mostly the females. You get rid of most of the males, but you leave a few males in there to provide the pollen to fertilize the female plants. And when they harvest it, they take the seeds out of the buds, and they toss all the remaining bud material, the flowers, gets mulched up and put back into the soil. And they take the seeds and they make hemp hearts or other yummy hemp oils and things like that. But in those flowers are rich in CBD because they bred that strain to be low in THC and to be high in CBD instead. And CBD, cannabidiol, is actually more medicinally valuable for many ailments than THC is. Cannabidiol is better at stopping epileptic seizures. It's better at shrinking cancerous tumors and killing cancer cells. Did you know that cannabinoids kill cancer cells and shrink tumors? It's quite amazing. And CBD is better at it than THC is. CBD is better at a lot of stuff. So if those farmers could keep those hemp flowers, they could extract the cannabinoids out of them, take the resins out of them. They may not get a whole ton per plant, but when you're growing 500 acres, it doesn't really matter what you get per plant. You've got a lot of this material. You can make amazing medicines out of this material. It's a waste material. They could sell it for quite cheap. They could produce a lot of it. I would love to get my hands on a farmer's hemp flower crop. Very low psychoactivity, incredible medicinal benefit. It's a waste product which has the ability to be a very versatile medicine. So I'd love it if our hemp farmers were aware of the medicinal benefits of hemp, as well as all the other industrial benefits. So this waste product could actually be an amazing treatment for so many ailments, and it's a waste product, so it would cost very, very little. And that's perhaps why the pharmaceutical industry is often a big opponent of legalized cannabis, because it would cut into their bottom line. And in fact, when the Liberals were bringing their drug laws in 1996, and that was when they legalized industrial hemp, and I'll give them credit for that, the rest of the law was not good at all. It had a lot of making it easier for police to seize and search people, made it easier to have trials without jury for trafficking in cannabis, to speed things up. And unlike the Conservatives, the Liberals actually at least had hearings on their bills. They ignored all the advice they got, but they actually had hearings on their bill. And this was when I was getting into this movement. I did a lot of research on the legislation they were doing. Every single group that testified, the Canadian Bar Association, Quebec Bar Association, the health organizations, the Addiction Research Foundation, the Medical Association, everyone was against it except for the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and the Canadian Pharmaceutical Association. They were the only two groups that were happy with the Liberals' new drug law in 1996. And so if you can draw from that what you will. But certainly I've seen many miraculous stories, or heard many miraculous stories, and seen some incredible healing at our dispensaries and other dispensaries from such a wide range of ailments that cannabis is a wonderful medicine and wonderful for industrial environmental benefits as well. And I hope that this legislation will let us to bring all those things to the front. It's not just about the recreational use or personal use of cannabis. It's about all those different aspects all coming together. And I think we can do that in the next couple of years if we can get this through in British Columbia. Anybody else got any final questions or thoughts they want to share or anything like that? Yes. No, they're not. And that is, I'm not sure if that's decriminalization, but it's a medicalization for those people. Certainly, they're not criminally liable anymore. They're allowed to grow cannabis. The Health Canada program has a lot of flaws in it, though, and there's one key flaw that I think creates a lot of the problems. But if you right now, if you go through the process of getting your doctor or specialist to support your cannabis use and recommend it, you can file with Health Canada. It used to take them like 6 months or longer to do the paperwork. Now they've got it down to a couple of weeks for most patients, although it really varies. But then if you get through that process, you have 3 options how you can get your cannabis. You can buy the government product. It's not very good. It was grown in a mine in Flin Flon. The Health Canada said it was too strong, so they had to shred it and add stock into it to reduce the potency. And then they freeze dry it, irradiate it, store it in a locker for quite a long time until it gets sent to patients. And most patients, they give it to them on credit, so a lot of patients got it, didn't really want it, couldn't return it, and are now there's a big bills. A lot of people owe money for this low quality cannabis. The other option is you can get permission to grow it yourself, and they give you a formula. If your doctor recommends so many grams a day for you, then you can grow so many plants for yourself. But not everybody can grow their own medicine or chooses to do so. It's not easy, and certainly if you're suffering from a serious ailment, it's even harder to grow medical grade cannabis. So you can get someone else to grow it for you. And this is where I think the problem is. When they first created the rules, they said the designated grower can only grow for 1 patient at a time. It has to be a 1-to-1 thing. And we went to court and fought that, and we won. And they said that's an unreasonable restriction. The Supreme Court struck it out, that number 1. So the federal government said, okay, we'll make it 2. You can go for 2 patients at a time. And this is, I think, where the problem is, because patients can't find anyone to grow their medicine for them. Because you're limited to only 2 patients at a time. You can't make a business selling medicine to 2 people at a time. There's no profit margin in that for you. So people abuse the system quite a bit. I'd say a lot of growers overgrow the amount, or they grow it. You're allowed to have so many plants, then you're allowed to have so much cannabis at the end. But it's not that hard to grow your plants really big, end up with more cannabis at the end. So there's a fair amount of diversion and patients helping to supplement their income by selling their extra cannabis. But a lot of it's because and a lot of patients get ripped off too. Someone says, oh, I'll grow it for you. Yeah, sure, give me your license, we'll set it up. And then when harvest time comes, that guy's gone and you don't get any medicine at all and they ripped you off. And it's very difficult to deal with these situations. But if there wasn't this 2-to-1 ratio, if I could grow for 100 patients at a time, or somebody could do that, not me, but if someone could do that, then the economy of scale would make the price drop. You could actually have a business growing for a lot of patients at a time. It would get it out of homes. A lot of municipalities don't like it being grown in homes. Well, if you're growing in a big scale, you're going to want to do it in an industrial area. You're going to want to do it outside of your basement and in a bigger way. It makes it easier to keep control over it. Checking out one guy growing for 100 patients is way easier than 100 people each growing for themselves. Keep an eye on it to regulate it. If they had that in place where you could grow for a lot of patients at once, I think the program would be working fine, and we wouldn't see that much medicine or people growing it in their own homes. It would naturally go towards where cities seem to want it to be, in industrial zones and warehouses and greenhouses and that kind of thing. But that restriction makes it very difficult. And what they're going to do is they're about to change those rules because they don't like people growing their own cannabis. They don't like dispensaries operating either. And there's no legislation that allows dispensaries to operate. We operate through court decisions that have certified our right to exist, and we operate through the tolerance of our communities. And many dispensaries have been raided in BC over the last couple of years, many more across Canada, but many new ones have started up and are still around. But it's definitely a gray area. But in 2014, they're going to bring these new rules in. And although they haven't said exactly what those rules are going to be, it looks like what they're going to do is they're going to cancel all the personal licenses, cancel all the designated licenses. They're going to set up 5 or 6 bigger companies. They're going to license them to grow cannabis for patients, maybe 5 or 6 strains each. And so there'll be competition within this government set monopoly where you'll get to pick from which of these 5 or 6 big companies you want to get your cannabis from. And that's where I think we'll see stuff like DuPont or DuMaurier or Monsanto or whatever. Maybe not those companies exactly, but the kind of people that are going to be getting these licenses are going to be companies that deal with that kind of stuff and not like me and my friends or whatever, right? And so I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to make it so you can buy those products from these companies by mail order, so patients will have more than just one crappy kind of cannabis. They'll have 30 kinds. Maybe there'll be some good stuff in there, who knows? But they're not going to let them have extracts. They're not going to sell them food products or capsules. Kirk Tusaw, the lawyer who helped write this, he won a court case recently affirming patients' rights to have extract, because they weren't even allowed to make their own extracts. You buy the cannabis from the government, they say don't smoke it, smoking's bad, but if you make it into a food product, you're manufacturing marijuana, you haven't got a license for that, that's against the law. Well, they're going to change that part. They're not going to sell anybody extracts or food products, but they're going to graciously let patients make their own extracts in their own homes with nobody else helping them, because that's not allowed. They'll let them do it themselves if they want, which is better than nothing, but really it should be broader than that. Patients should be able to buy extracts in these products really and from dispensaries. But I think that's their goal. If they can put a constitutionally valid system in place, then they can come after dispensaries. Right now they know if they go after dispensaries, and we'll see how these court cases unravel next year, but we've got pretty solid court decisions on our side that patients need medicine, that the government's failing to give it to them, so we should have a right to exist. But if they put a system in place where a judge says, well, look, there's 30 kinds of marijuana available, how many do you need? You know, maybe this is good enough. Then I could see them coming after dispensaries and changing things there too. So it's a long answer to a short question, but that's what the situation is right now. I would be pretty upset if I was a patient who had struggled to get my license, learned how to grow cannabis, invested thousands of dollars in my grow room, maybe lost my first couple of crops till I learned what I was doing. Finally, I'm growing myself some medicinal grade cannabis, and then the government's going to say, oh, we're taking that right away. Now you can buy it from this monopoly. Oh, and by the way, we have you on a list of other people that are growing medical cannabis now. We're going to be there to check to make sure you've stopped doing it. I think that's a very bad situation for a lot of patients to be in. Very stressful, very difficult, very expensive, and very unfair. And so although I think most patients, if they could buy cannabis or get it, they wouldn't want to grow it in their own homes, I think people have that right to grow any plant in their garden they want ultimately, and that the way to deal with that is through safety regulations and that kind of things. But I think ultimately in a legally regulated system, who brews their own alcohol? A few people do, but vast majority of alcohol drinkers do not brew their own alcohol. Those who do it are people who are really into wine, who really have their own thing. Some cannabis growers will want to grow their own because they're just like some tomato growers grow their own because they're really into tomatoes. But by and large, if we have a legal system where you can get it cheaply and effectively, most people aren't going to want to bother growing their own cannabis. That would be the way to and if it's legal, if you can get a license or make sure they inspect your safety or whatever, then that's all you really need, I would think. So there you go. Yes.
So if I heard you correctly, cannabis usage is mainly for psychoactivation, is it not? As opposed to using hemp as a building material.
Well, I'd say considering probably the number of plants, probably most of the cannabis grown in Canada is hemp, I would say, because they're growing it on a much larger scale per plant, although I'm not really sure. But I mean, if we change the laws on marijuana, it makes it a lot easier to grow hemp. Put it that way. The only reason there's tight restrictions on hemp varieties of cannabis is because of fears of the marijuana varieties of cannabis, right? And when they first legalized industrial hemp in Canada, the big fear was farmers growing marijuana in their hemp field. That's all anybody could talk about. They're going to grow marijuana in their hemp fields. And it's never happened. It's been 18 years, 16 years or whatever it's been. And I've never heard of that happening ever. And in fact, in the middle of a hemp field is the worst place to grow marijuana, right? It's going to get seeded. If you're growing for seed, it's going to get seeded by the male plants and it's going to get wrecked. If you're growing for fiber, you're going to harvest all your plants before your marijuana's gone to flower, and so it's going to be sitting there in an empty field with all the hemp. So it's a terrible place to grow. But that was the big fear, and I would hope that now, after all this time, we can loosen up on those rules. I'm not sure conservative governments are the one to do it or not, but I would like to see those rules lightened up quite a bit. They're really way too strict, and farmers risk losing their whole crop. They come and test it if it's over the THC limit, and that can vary in weather conditions, or if the plants get damaged, the THC level can rise. If it's over the arbitrary 0.3% THC limit, your whole crop gets destroyed. So it's quite risky for farmers to engage in this because it can be quite challenging. Most of the seed varieties now don't really go over those amounts, but still it's a challenge for farmers to get involved in this, and it should be subsidized and promoted and not restricted and controlled like that.
Do you think your movement will be heard this time as opposed to all the times in the past? What's different this time?
Well, you know, this time it's not, I think there's a lot of things that are different this time. I think we've got a broad consensus and we've seen the victories in Washington and Colorado. One of the common arguments is, well, you're right, but we can't change the laws because America will freak out. And they'll shut down the border or they'll do whatever. But now when our own neighbors to the south have put in some great progressive legalization law, that argument kind of fades. But I also think that it's not about us convincing somebody else anymore. We've got the numbers, we've got the support in British Columbia. It's not about, like I tell people getting signatures, if someone disagrees, don't convert them, don't lecture them, say thanks and move on, because we have the numbers out there. It's whether or not we're ready. It's whether or not our movement and people who want to change the laws are motivated enough and active enough and are going to get out there and make a difference. That, I think, is our challenge. It's not about anybody else anymore. It's about whether we can do this as a group, whether the people in this room and in all the other rooms I'm talking to and all the people that want to see these laws change, whether we can get together and make it happen. But
We represent ourselves as well. Like I'm here tonight, I mean, no disrespect because of you. If it had been Mr. Mann hosting this evening, I wouldn't have come because I don't feel you represent me. I don't know you and I don't know you. But as a working pothead, you represent me in appearance and the way you talk and the way you come across. Pot TV and Mr. Mann do not represent me. So if you were to come to my door, chances are I wouldn't listen. But if you were to come to my door, I would listen. So we have that law. I get very frustrated with that, with being represented when I feel that doesn't represent me. So that's half the fight.
I will say Mick's a really good guy, first of all, but I understand your point. I understand your point. I understand your point. But no,
I'm just saying.
absolutely. No, let me, I guess I'll say that we need,
Talk to people about it, they'll shut it down with those long-haired potheads.
well, we need to have a broad thing. No, I understand, and pot users come in all shapes and sizes and all ages and demographics. But those that are willing to stand up for it and be open about it are usually those who have less to lose and who are more into it. And so you see, I compare it to the Gay Pride Parade, for instance. The very first Gay Pride Parades in Vancouver, people are all, oh, the fags are coming out, it's going to be crazy, whatever. And those that come out and show out, they're not the businessmen who were gay and aren't open about it. It's those who are more open and the younger people. As it gets broader, more people feel comfortable, you get broader support. Now, gays are actually in the minority at the Gay Pride Parade because everybody wants to be there. It's a huge, and so I think our thing's the same way. I think the first people that come out are the ones who are really into cannabis, who have dreadlocks, who are younger, who have less to lose about it. And I think those who wear suits, who smoke cannabis on the weekends and might lose their job or might feel they're going to be judged, they're the last ones to come out, right? They're the last ones to want to be public about it. They'll only come out when there's already this kind of thing. But we're seeing some of that changing. You know, like Richard Branson, for instance, has been really active. And there's this new movie out about the whole drug war, The House I Live In, and there's a couple of other documentaries and things out. And so I think we're getting to the point where it's beyond just people who look like they smoke pot, and it's gone beyond that to a broader range of people, right? But so I would say the best way, if you want to see people representing, is to represent it yourself and to get out there and be a conscious, aware cannabis user who's not ashamed of what you do and represents our culture and represents pot smokers in a positive way, and try to be that.
You gotta dress and be part of the work, you know? Like Mark Henry used to show up in his suits, but he was vaped all the time. That'd be the same as talking here about alcohol and you're standing here in a t-shirt and boxers and you're loaded and you've got a bottle. You're not gonna get the message through. Absolutely, I'd like to get the message through, but I'm afraid of hitting people.
You know, when I look around this room also, I don't see really, there's a couple of young people here, not even really that young, but mostly I see people that look like, you know, over 40, over 50 kind of thing. And that's actually good, I would say, because people that are older are usually more politically active, more aware, more likely to vote, more likely to get involved. But I bet if you ask somebody, well, who's going to show up to your marijuana talk, they would imagine a bunch of kids or a bunch of younger people or whatever, a bunch of tie-dyed, dreadlock, you know, whatever kind of. But that's not the case at all. And I have no idea how many people here use cannabis or not. Certainly many of those who volunteer for our campaign and are quite active are not cannabis users, or they use it once in a while, or they used to use it or whatever. But like some of our most dedicated volunteers at our office are people that aren't really into cannabis smoking, but they believe in the change and they support it, or they like hemp or whatever. But like, so I think we got to get beyond that. It's got to be beyond, you know, you don't have to be gay to support gay rights. You don't have to be black or a woman to support equal rights for other groups. And we got to go beyond just those who use cannabis to a broader people who recognize that whether or not they choose to do it themselves, that other people shouldn't be in prison. They don't want to spend their tax dollars imprisoning other people and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I try to wear, I don't wear a tie, but I try to dress nice to, you know, I'm on camera and stuff. But absolutely. But I would say the best way to do it is to represent yourself. Get out there, knock on some doors, talk to some people, spread the word, and like be the change you want to see. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that same topic, I've always had a little bit of a problem with Mark Emery. I mean, I like what he's tried to do, but you know, when you come out in front of the cameras and you got big joints all the time, puff, puff, you know, big, you know, heavy smoke. It's kind of like you're saying, you know, just like you came up there and heard, this is not a problem. Oh, man, we're all have fun here, you know, and you know, it's like. I am a responsible pot smoker, you know, and I smoke occasionally, but I don't ever do it when I'm, you know, on my job or anything, or conducting business or anything. And, you know, and so he doesn't, you know, so I think that's been a big flaw in a lot of the campaign, is saying that there's not a single problem with smoking big joints at any time of day, you know. I think there is.
Yeah, well, sure. I think that you know, we got to tailor our message and we got to look what we're doing at. I'd say I say there's room for all approaches from my perspective, and that there's some people that are extremists or pulling the argument in some way. And I remember when I first started doing Cannabis Culture Magazine, people would be like, "You guys talk about marijuana so much. You're wrecking it for the hemp stuff. You should just talk about hemp. That's the important thing." And there's always people who have got, you know, or these recreational users are wrecking it for the medical users, and you guys should just let us. You know, so there's always those divisions of those who think someone else is going too far or not far enough or whatever, right? And like, Mark's definitely a controversial fellow who, aside from cannabis, was someone who likes stirring things up and that, you know, and he had a lot of successes and a lot of challenges and maybe some failures as well, right? But he certainly opened things up and was able to get bongs and pipes and information and get a lot of attention to the cause. But I think for this, because I feel for the early days of our movement, we were really trying to sort of like appeal to our base more or whatever, and now I feel like we're trying to go beyond that to a broader range of people. And maybe that's some of the difference, but I don't know. But I hope that this strategy works. I hope, you know, we don't have any pot leaves on here. I like marijuana leaves. They look lovely, but we don't put them on our stuff because I want people who aren't pro-pot to still support our campaign. I want people who think that marijuana is harmful or dangerous or whatever to still recognize that we can be sensible about it, and the way to reduce those harms and do it is in a reasonable fashion with some kind of regulated system, right? So, but you know, I mean, I certainly, there's a lot of pictures of me out there smoking joints from my time on Cannabis Culture Magazine, and I even made a couple of videos that were somewhat controversial when they got aired publicly, but I don't know, it takes all kinds, but I hope this approach works, and I hope that we can get a broad consensus of people coming forward and making these changes happen in our province. Yes, I'll go with him and then you.
I don't smoke pot, but I support the campaign.
Right, well that's what we need, that's everything we need. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that we need to emphasize moderation and balance in cannabis the same way we deal with alcohol. You know, it's not just a bunch of potheads smoking it 24/7. You know, there's moderation in it. And I think that if we get that idea out there, maybe people who aren't pro-pot will be more open to the idea that even though we're pot smokers, we're responsible with it.
Well, you know, that reminds me that I have a flyer here called Take Care with Cannabis, and it's produced by Vancouver Coastal Health in the city of Vancouver. And I think it's the best cannabis awareness, responsible use kind of flyer I've ever seen. And, you know, a lot of our cannabis education in our schools is highly misinforming and wrong information and can make people not trust, you know, what they're getting, or make kids think that the things they're being told about other substances are also invalid as well. And this Take Care with Cannabis flyer, it's really nice. It encourages responsible use. And I talked to the people who put it together, and they were like, you know, we don't teach, I mean, even if abstinence is the best model, we don't teach abstinence only in our sex education classes. We teach responsible sexuality. We teach people how to use a condom, how you're going to have sex, do it with someone you care for, be responsible about it. It's a special thing. And we should treat cannabis in the same way. And it's a really wonderful little flyer. You know, try to use organic cannabis. Be aware of what you're using. Don't use too much at first. If you're going to eat it, eat a little bit. Wait a while. Try some more later. Don't use it all at once. But I think that prohibition takes away all those structures because it doesn't allow any middle ground, right? It's either all or nothing. And because you can't use it somewhere safely, you want to use a lot somewhere else so that when you get to the place where you're going, you're still got that. It happened with alcohol too, right? People would drink more. Those little hip flasks, people would carry it around because you couldn't buy it anywhere. You got to bring it with you. You got to drink it before you go somewhere and get blasted because you can't get any when you're at that place. And so it made alcohol use more dangerous, and it was more difficult to be a responsible alcohol user during alcohol prohibition. And the only alcohol available was really, really strong, concentrated alcohol. People weren't smuggling beer and wine. They were smuggling pure alcohol that you would then dilute down. And the same with cannabis. You can't really get mid-grade or low-potency cannabis products because nobody's selling those kind of things. Because of prohibition, you want to make it as strong as possible. And so some of the cannabis varieties, I know people that would love to use, and we do sell some varieties that are dispensaries that are less potent. People like them better sometimes because they find some stuff's too much for them. So I think that what you're saying is true, that we need to put out an idea of responsible cannabis users, that we're just like anybody else, and that the way to encourage responsibility and to encourage safety is in a legally regulated system, and that prohibition pushes out all those rules. You can't encourage safety, you can't encourage responsible use really when you're trying to fight a prohibitionist battle against cannabis. Those things don't go well together at all. But I absolutely agree, and you know, we should be pushing towards that idea that cannabis in moderation, and if it's not for you, that's fine, and if it is for you, there's a time and a place, and that kind of thing, absolutely.
Back to what I was saying earlier on, you have to respect the people that don't want to use it, who are offended by sometimes the smells that come, etc. That is a huge problem.
Yeah, well, if you're offended by a smell, I would say that's kind of a different thing. If the smoke itself is bothering somebody, that's one thing. But you know, I lived in an apartment building, we smelled curry and chili and perfume and all those kind of things. And so that's also part of communal living. But no, I absolutely agree. And like I said, I think in a legal system, we can create reasonable rules around it. We've got some rules around tobacco, then we can create the same kind of rules around cannabis as well. And I feel like we're coming to the close of our evening now. So if there's any last questions, I'll take those from anybody. Otherwise, I'm going to send you off to get out there, get some signatures, spread the word, go to our Facebook page, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. But most importantly, grab some of those sign-up sheets. You've got our address on the bottom. You can just mail them back to us. Or I said you can give them to Mick, or you can scan them in and email them to us or whatever. But you can get us those sign-up forms, register your friends and family, spread the word, and let's make history. Let's do it together. We know we can do it. It's not just me, it's everybody here in this room now. I'm charging you with the sacred responsibility to get involved. This is our chance. Let's make it happen. Let's do it in the next couple of years while we have this opportunity. Let's not waste it, and pass this on to our kids and grandkids again. Thank you all again for coming, and thanks, Mick, for helping set this up tonight. And have a wonderful evening. Thanks. Did you want to? Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Oh, we can do it in the draw now, right?
Yeah.
You
We're
got a
gonna
door
have,
prize.
we got a couple of door prizes here, so we're gonna draw a couple tickets. You want to draw them, Dana?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Come in front.
Okay. There you go.
And the first lucky winner, who has ticket 123?
1, 2, 3. 3, 0, 1.
And you can have, you got your choice. What's in the bag, which actually is a small little smoking accessory donated from West Coast Hemp Shop. Or you can have this autographed copy of Cannabis Culture, back issue, actually with my articles in the centerfold, if you'd like. You'll take the bag. This is just like a game show, eh? All right, and the winner here, Dana, well, the winner of this back issue of Cannabis Culture Magazine, some great reading. It's even got the very best of Vancouver Island in it. 130. Anybody's got 1 3 to 30? And we'll keep the ticket, because then we got to count. We don't know how many are in here.
Right on.
And that looks like the one.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it very much. And so yeah, thanks for coming. And if you need be, on the website, you can find me on Facebook. Opus Farms is one way, or you can get a hold of me at mick@cannabisculture.com. It's for an email, or just see me around town. I'm not hard to get a hold of. Leave a message. West Coast Hemp, I want to thank them for supplying the prize. And I know Doug is here in the audience. He works there. There's sign-up sheets will be there as well. And it's another place you can leave. Pardon? Laura's here. Oh, there, and Laura's right there. Yes, exactly. Also the manager of West Coast Hemp. So yeah, you can leave messages there, and we'll sort of use that to get together and organize. Thanks again.
And the manila envelopes on the side there, they're like a little activist sign-up sheets kit with some stuff in there. So if you want to get involved, grab one of those.
Package,
and take it with
activist
you.
package. Yeah, great. Yo, Pot TV, thanks for watching. You still on? Yeah. Cultivate freedom.